Welcome to this new episode of Dpen Crimes. I'm Pala, and today we'll be discussing a case that has generated a lot of public interest. In this episode, we'll focus on the accusations, the evidence, and the clues. It's up to you to decide what to believe because, honestly, I haven't made up my mind yet. I remain open to all scenarios and possible interpretations, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Personally, I keep bouncing between 2 or 3 possible scenarios that seem plausible but still have gaps and weaknesses. So please write to me. I really need your input to get a clearer picture. Today, we'll delve into the prosecution's perspective. In the next episode, we'll explore the defense's arguments, which I believe are highly significant and deserve close attention. After that, we'll attempt to piece together some reconstructions of the events. This case, as Roberto mentioned in the chat, is relatively straightforward and easy to follow. Many of you might already be familiar with it from the Netflix series. It's a case where, within the first 10 or 15 minutes, the basic premise is clear. A young girl has died, and her parents are somehow involved. However, the exact degree of their involvement isn't immediately obvious. Just days after Asunta's murder, which occurred on September 21st, her mother, Rosario, was arrested on either September 23rd or 24th. Her father, Alfonso, was detained the following day. These arrests marked a significant turning point. The parents would never leave prison. Tragically, Rosario took her own life 7 years later, still in custody. Although the case might appear straightforward, there are dark, murky areas, shadows, as Conrad might say, that make it far more complex. In my opinion, Asunta's murder remains a mystery despite the existence of guilty parties and a court ruling. This reminds me of other cases, such as that of Anna Maria Franzoni in Cogne. When it comes to parents accused of killing their children, the primary issue often revolves around the motive. In Anna Maria's case, the motive wasn't clear, and the sequence of events remained confusing. Similarly, in Asunta's case, there's no clear murder weapon, and the exact circumstances remain ambiguous. For instance, there are differing accounts about the timeline in Anna Maria's case. Some claim she killed little Samuele before taking Davide to the school bus, while others suggest it happened afterward. Personally, I don't have a definitive stance, as both theories seem plausible. What's the point of bringing this up? It's to highlight that these cases often share common traits. It's not just about the motive, why Rosario and Alfonso, or perhaps only Rosario or only Alfonso, decided to kill her, but also about the how they planned and executed their actions. At first, watching the series and studying the case, I was convinced it was a well-orchestrated plan. But as I analyzed, studied, and reflected, I realized that if it had been meticulously planned, one would expect a far less chaotic execution. From 2 such intelligent parents, I anticipated a carefully devised and executed plan, one that wouldn't lead to their arrest just 3 days later. However, this can't be classified as a crime of passion. It's not the work of a disorganized killer, given that lorazepam pills were administered to their daughter, which suggests premeditation. So, there was a criminal plan in place, and I'll share the various reasons that lead me to this conclusion. This plan didn't seem to originate on September 21st, or even during the summer, but, astonishingly, as far back as January 9th. Today, I'll explain what I mean by that. At the same time, the execution of this plan appears immature and poorly thought out, leading to the parents' arrest just a few days later. Let's proceed step by step and examine the clues and evidence in this case. Personally, I prefer to refer to these as clues rather than definitive evidence. These are concordant and substantial clues, but they lack the weight to be considered irrefutable proof. Let's start with the orange rope, a heavily discussed element in both the series and reality. By the way, some of you pointed out that the producers of the excellent documentary I mentioned earlier are the same as those of the series, which I didn't know. When I said the writers had studied the documentary thoroughly, I wasn't wrong. Here's what's interesting about the rope. Near Asunta's body, 3 pieces of this orange nylon rope were found. The same rope was discovered by police in the Montuto villa, at the finca. How was it found? It was during the night of September 22nd, just hours after Asunta's body had been discovered. The parents took the police to this large villa because Rosario, the mother, claimed to have been there before returning home. We'll later need to delve into Rosario's statements, but for now, I'll simplify things to give you an overview. It was around 3 a.m. The body had been discovered less than 2 hours earlier, and the police, accompanied by the parents, arrived at the villa. At one point, Rosario said she needed to use the bathroom but chose to go upstairs instead of using the closer one downstairs. A police officer, suspicious not so much because there was a closer bathroom, as the series suggests, but because of how quickly Rosario ran up the stairs, decided to follow her. Don't imagine him sprinting after her, but he definitely picked up the pace to catch up and see what she was doing. The officer entered the room Rosario had gone into and found a basket containing tissues and, more significantly, pieces of the same orange rope. It's important to note that this officer had been at the crime scene less than an hour earlier and had seen traces of rope near Asunta's body. He immediately stopped Rosario and collected the rope as evidence to send it for analysis. The results are very intriguing. The rope found near Asunta's body is identical in material and chemical composition to the one discovered in the Montuto house. However, the ends don't match. This means the 3 pieces of rope found next to the body were not cut in the same way as the pieces found in the house. In other words, while they are of the same type, it cannot be definitively proven that they came from the same spool. So, what do the investigators do? They visit various stores to try to purchase a similar rope but fail to find a match. In both the documentary and the series, there's a famous scene where Rosario's defense lawyer claims to have found identical ropes in several stores, implying that the investigators didn't do their job well. However, the lead investigator counters by pointing out that although the rope might be similar in material and color, its specific chemical composition doesn't match perfectly. As a result, while the rope is a strong clue, it cannot be considered definitive proof since it's impossible to confirm that the pieces found near Asunta's body came from the spool in the Montuto house. From my perspective, though, we're already beyond reasonable doubt in this case. So, while it might not be 100% conclusive proof, it's very close and carries significant weight. Another intriguing detail is that the small pieces of rope found near Asunta's body were reportedly used to tie her wrists and ankles. This raises an important question. Why tie her up? If, as evidence suggests, Asunta was taken to the finca already sedated, having ingested 27 lorazepam pills, there was no need to restrain her, as she would have been incapable of movement. Binding her wrists and ankles could have been an attempt to stage a kidnapping or, more chillingly, to make her body easier to transport. However, tying her up increases the risk of mistakes, such as leaving DNA on the rope, and indeed, such mistakes were made. The second clue, which is almost as strong as evidence, lies in Rosario's statements. In her report on September 21st, she tells a very detailed story that changes once the police show her a photograph. Let's start with what Rosario says on September 21st. She claims that she and her daughter Asunta had lunch at Alfonso's house, which aligns with the facts. Rosario then states that she returned home around 5 p.m. and decided to go to the finca at around 7 p.m., a trip that would take 25 to 30 minutes depending on traffic. Being a Saturday evening, heavy traffic was unlikely. At this point, Rosario says she went to pick up some costumes and asked Asunta to come with her. However, Asunta, being a very studious and meticulous girl, was busy doing homework. Rosario says she then told Asunta to stay home, promising to return in a couple of hours. This story seems logical. Leaving a 13-year-old at home alone for a few hours on a Saturday evening doesn't strike me as particularly odd. However, the problem arises 2 days later when a photo is uncovered from a gas station security camera. In 4 frames, Rosario's car, a petrol green Mercedes, can be seen driving by at around 7:24 p.m. The road matches the route Rosario would have taken from her house to her late parents' home, where they had lived their entire lives. The odd thing about the gas station photo is that the passenger seat should have been empty, as Rosario claimed she went out alone. However, the photo shows a silhouette resembling a human figure, slightly smaller than an adult. Additionally, this figure appears to be wearing a white t-shirt, the same color Asunta was wearing when her body was found. When I first saw this image in the series, my initial thought was about the lover. I speculated that Rosario might have left her daughter alone to meet her lover and, upon returning, found Asunta missing. It seemed like a plausible scenario. However, Rosario immediately accepts that the figure in the photo is Asunta. This is significant. How can we be sure it's really Asunta and not someone else, like Miguel, her lover? Rosario herself provides the answer. Instead of suggesting the figure could be Miguel or someone else, she changes her story. And, as I always say, when a suspect changes their story, it's a red flag. What does Rosario say? Initially, she claimed to have left Asunta at home alone. Later, she said that Asunta had actually come with her. She added that, on the way back, she remembered she had forgotten the costumes and left Asunta near her father's house, a 5-minute walk away, before returning to Montuto. The difference between these two versions is substantial. In the first version, Rosario makes a round trip, while in the second, she alters the story. She and her daughter go to the Finca, and on the way back, she drops Asunta off in an unspecified location. During her various statements, Rosario provides 2 or 3 different locations where she claims to have left Asunta. However, all these locations had security cameras that could have recorded the girl, and none of them captured her presence. This gives us a very high degree of certainty. Asunta went to Montuto with her mother. Rosario is unable to provide a credible explanation of what happened to Asunta afterward. The change in her story seems to conceal something far more troubling. Let's move on to a third important clue: Alfonso's laptop and phone. In the series, there's a scene where the police are searching Rosario's house, and Alfonso suddenly says he needs to go home to retrieve something he forgot. This action comes off as slightly suspicious. In reality, on September 22nd, the day after Asunta's body was found, the police conducted a general search of Alfonso's house, taking photographs. In the living room, they photographed a briefcase containing a laptop. However, when a more thorough search was conducted a couple of weeks later, the laptop was gone. Interestingly, this laptop reappeared 3 months later. In a twist, Alfonso's lawyers claimed the laptop had always been there and suggested that the police simply overlooked it. They also hinted that some data might have been deleted. This incident of the laptop disappearing and reappearing cast significant doubt on Alfonso's actions. Moreover, an analysis revealed searches for pornography, not illegal content, but standard material, with a particular interest in adult film stars with Asian features. It's worth noting that Asunta was born in China and clearly had Asian physical characteristics. This detail adds another layer of discomfort and suspicion to the case. Let's now move on to the fourth point, which I consider fundamental and forms the core of the prosecution's case against the two parents: the lorazepam pills. What happened? On July 1st, 2013, Rosario was discharged from the hospital. As I mentioned earlier, she had spent 8 days hospitalized due to a worsening of her health, both because of lupus and her psychological state. She was battling depression and various other issues. I'm convinced that during this period, Alfonso made a sort of devil's pact with her. He promised to support her through this difficult time, but in exchange, he demanded that Rosario cut ties with her lover, Miguel, a successful businessman. Eventually, Rosario agreed. Now, this is purely my speculation, as there's no direct evidence or clue to back it up. But I believe that, during this time, Rosario hinted to Alfonso that Asunta needed to be removed. Why do I think this? Because after Rosario's discharge on July 1st, Alfonso began taking care of both her and Asunta. Then, something disturbing happened on the night of July 4th to 5th. Asunta was attacked. We have 2 versions of this incident. one from Asunta, as relayed through SMS messages to a friend, and the other from Rosario. According to Rosario, in the middle of the night, she heard noises like a struggle coming from Asunta's room. She rushed in and saw a man dressed in black trying to strangle her daughter. Rosario fought with the attacker and managed to scare him away. Instead of calling the police, she informed Alfonso, and together they decided not to file a report. Their justification was to protect Asunta from the ordeal of investigations and questioning. This is particularly striking because Rosario, being a lawyer, knew exactly what the proper course of action should have been. The next day, Asunta messaged a friend saying, "Last night, someone tried to kill me." When the friend asked for clarification, Asunta confirmed, "Yes, someone tried to kill me. I'll tell you when we meet, but don't tell anyone." The key question here is, did someone really break into the house that night? The answer is almost certainly no. We have a fairly high degree of certainty, though not absolute, because the neighbors, who had small but highly sensitive dogs, reported that their dogs didn't bark that night. This suggests no one entered the house through the door. The attacker was likely already inside, which leads us to believe that the perpetrator may have been Rosario herself. There's more evidence to support this. In the days following the incident, the mother of one of Asunta's friends noticed marks on Asunta's neck. This is a crucial clue that wasn't mentioned in the series. Now let's go back to January 9th, 2013. Remember, at the beginning of January, Alfonso discovered Rosario's repeated infidelities, and the two separated. On January 9th, Rosario called a locksmith to change the locks on her door. The locksmith later testified that Rosario asked him to come and replace the lock because someone had allegedly tried to break in to kill her daughter. This means that 7 months before the July attack, Rosario was already anticipating an attack on Asunta, yet she never filed a police report. Given this information, we can assert with a reasonable degree of certainty that the attack on Asunta on the night of July 4th to 5th, 2013, was not the work of an external intruder. Only two people could have attacked Asunta that night, Rosario or Alfonso. Interestingly, Rosario's phone was active that night. It showed internet searches and messages, indicating she was awake at the time. This detail strongly suggests that Rosario herself may have been the one who attempted to harm her daughter. Perhaps Rosario had already envisioned what would unfold in the following months. Asunta doesn't die, or, depending on how one views it, Rosario fails to kill her. Either way, the events of July 4th to 5th, 2013 are significant. A first assault, a first attempt to harm Asunta, and the parents' subsequent decision not to file a report. Let's revisit the timeline, which is crucial. On July 1st, Rosario returns home after being hospitalized. On the night of July 4th to 5th, the first assault on Asunta occurs. Then, on July 9th, another peculiar and incriminating incident involving Asunta takes place. Asunta attended a music school, where she was regarded as a prodigy. On that day, her teacher noticed something alarming. Asunta couldn't stand up properly, was dragging one foot, and was struggling to speak. Eventually, she collapsed. The teacher called her parents, and Alfonso reassured her, claiming it was perfectly normal. He explained that Asunta was simply very tired and was taking strong antihistamines for an allergy. Similar episodes occurred on July 16th and July 22nd, when her teachers noticed that Asunta wasn't her usual self. She would fall asleep, speak incoherently, and struggle to stay upright. On these occasions, the teachers had to call the parents to come and pick her up. It's important to note that the defense never denied the administration of medication to Asunta. The prosecution made a smart move by questioning Asunta's pediatrician, asking if she had ever been diagnosed with an allergy. The answer was no. Nor was there any record of her being prescribed medication. They then spoke with the family's nanny and a close friend of Rosario. The nanny confirmed that throughout August, Asunta had been in perfect health. What becomes evident here is that Asunta was drugged by her parents, a fact the defense doesn't contest. Alfonso purchased lorazepam, a tranquilizer, in massive quantities, over 300 pills in less than a month. Some of these pills were secretly administered to Asunta. On September 21st, the day she was murdered, Asunta had approximately 27 milligrams of lorazepam in her system, the equivalent of 27 pills. This raises a crucial question. Why did the parents start sedating their daughter? One theory is that they hoped, if Asunta were to overdose on the pills, they could claim she had taken them on her own while they were out. This explanation seems strange though, as one might attempt this once, but not 6 times. Others speculate that Rosario simply wanted Asunta to sleep for long hours, giving her the freedom to pursue her own affairs. However, this doesn't fully make sense either, as Rosario had a nanny and Alfonso to look after Asunta. The regular administration of lorazepam points to something more premeditated. It seems to establish a pattern of behavior that ultimately culminated in the events of September 21st. The question remains, was this part of a long-term plan, or was it the result of increasingly desperate and chaotic decision-making by the parents? Either way, the pattern of sedation is one of the most damning pieces of evidence against them. Let's take September 20th, 2013, for example. The day before Asunta's death, Rosario went to Bilbao with her lover, leaving Asunta with Alfonso and claiming she had to go for work. This shows that there was no need to resort to sedatives to manage the situation. The administration of the drug is one of the most puzzling aspects of this case, along with the motive. Some have speculated that it was part of a trial, testing the effects of the drug on Asunta, sedating her, and then sending her on 3 separate trips over a span of 20 days, and later for a full month. Something doesn't add up. Why would these parents, particularly Rosario, although Alfonso couldn't have been unaware, decide to drug their child? I still don't have a clear answer to this question. This situation is a critical and highly incriminating point. If Alfonso hadn't been the one buying the medication and picking up Asunta when she was in a physically compromised state, he might not have been convicted. There is much less evidence against him compared to what exists against Rosario. The 6th reason behind the conviction relates to some words Rosario allegedly said, which were overheard while she was in prison. It's worth noting that these statements were never used in court, as the judge decided to exclude them. However, they were widely published in Spanish newspapers. At one point, Rosario told Alfonso, "Your sick imagination is going to get us into a lot of trouble." It's never been clear what exactly she was referring to, and the explanations they provided felt rather forced, more like after-the-fact justifications. Additionally, Alfonso asked Rosario, "I gave you all the time to do it, didn't I?" Again, it's unclear what he was referring to. Now, let's move on to the motives. One of the strongest motives, in my opinion, is linked to Rosario's relationship with her lover, Miguel. She had proposed that they live together, leaving her husband behind, even though she had already started divorce proceedings. In this context, it's plausible to think that Rosario may have seen Asunta as an obstacle to her happiness and her desire to start a new life with Miguel. Personally, I don't think Miguel ever intended to leave his wife. He probably just wanted to have some fun. But Rosario was a troubled woman, dealing with mental health issues, administering powerful sedatives to her daughter, and had already considered staging an attack against Asunta. In this scenario, Alfonso's role becomes more complex. He was still in love with his wife, and even though he quickly realized something was wrong, he chose to stay by her side. Perhaps he saw this as an act of love towards a woman who no longer loved him, and that too could be a motive. Another hypothesis is that both parents had grown tired of Asunta. However, I find this explanation unconvincing. Some argue that, since Asunta was adopted, her parents might have found it easier to lose interest in her. But I doubt that a parent, adoptive or not, would stop loving their child just because they've reached adolescence. It's natural for kids, especially at 13, to become more rebellious. It's simply a normal phase of growing up. It's hard to imagine that both parents wanted their daughter dead. I think it's more likely that Rosario wanted Asunta out of the way to be free to live her relationship with Miguel. Alfonso, on the other hand, didn't fully grasp the severity of the situation and, instead of stopping Rosario, chose to support her. That said, there are many inconsistencies in this story. These inconsistencies are worth analyzing, as they suggest that the parents may have had prior knowledge of what was going to happen to Asunta. Personally, I believe Rosario was directly involved, and the reasons behind her actions will likely remain a mystery, especially now that she's no longer alive to explain them. There are no signs of sexual violence against Asunta, and that's an important detail to note. The possibility of an accident has been considered and will be explored in a future episode. So, for now, I'll leave you with that. Thank you all for listening. See you in the next episode of Dpen Crimes, where we'll discuss everything that doesn't add up in the parents' favor. Take care, everyone.